Yes, well, good morning for me, good afternoon for everyone or for most of you. Um, as well, I would like to first of all welcome Martina, our guest speaker, joining us from UK, and I would like to welcome our students, guests. As you may know, May 15 is celebrated as International Climate Day in various countries of the world in order to draw public attention to one of the global problems, global climate warming. With various events held in every year on May 15, International Climate Day, experts call for expanding measures to combat climate change, increase greenery, increase the use of renewable energy resources, reducing greenhouse gas emissions and create green energy regions, and basically to prevent global warming. The impact of global warming is already seen in the form of storms, floods, heat waves, droughts, and forest fires, both on our planet's ecosystems and individuals and communities. Therefore, there is a need to adapt to climate impacts on Earth, which will increase in the future unless the global warming process is stopped. Well, climate change is not a distant threat, but at the moment a pressuring issue which demands our immediate attention. Its effects are already visible and will be catastrophic unless we act now. Through education, innovation, and adherence to our climate commitments, we can make the necessary changes to protect the planet. These changes also provide huge opportunities to modernize our infrastructure, which will create new jobs and promote greater global prosperity. Again, as you may already know, among the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, SDG 13 addresses climate issues and tells us to take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. In order to draw attention to all these issues, raise awareness on global issues for our students at Eastern Mediterranean University, whom we try to raise as global citizens and increase awareness of global warming and environmental problems within the local community, our research center, Urban Research and Development Center, is hosting Martina Juvara today. Martina is the director of the urban strategy company called Urban Silence. Her work actually centers on large-scale change and the need for fresh design thinking at the crossroads of investment, infrastructure planning, and social well-being. Martina is a long-standing active member of ISOCARP, the International Society of City and Regional Planners, and I'm very glad to be working with her in the scientific committee for more than a year now, I think. And she's also the head of delegation at COP26 and COP28. She has been pushing for a more ambitious engagement of the planning profession in climate action, advocating systemic change to prepare cities for future challenges through professional work, the activities and outreach of the society, and through media channels in the UK. In her professional practice, she works for international agencies, governments, and cities in the UK, in South Mediterranean and Arabic region, preparing programs of change involving strategic spatial planning, improvement governance, and identification of key interventions that can have a transformational impact. I would like to thank Martina to accept our invitation for today's seminar and leave the screen to her.
Thank you, Shabnam. This has been a great introduction, and it's always embarrassing to hear your sort of life and commitment played back to you. And it's an honor to be here. It's obviously an honor to work with you on the ISOCARP Strategic Committee, and this is a huge agenda. And so I'll try today to give you an overview, but of course, I believe that is one of the most important things that we have to address in the future, in the near future, or starting even before, even today and yesterday. So it's a very important issue, and I hope I have somehow your attention, and what I'm saying is interesting enough to make a change. Now is my time to share the screen, and is always the most stressful part of any presentation. Okay, so this is the title. Sorry, this is the title. Can you see my screen?
No.
Am I sharing it? No. Okay.
It was on and off now. Yes, now it's fine.
Okay, now it's fine. Excellent. Yep. So yeah, so I decided to title it "Your Future in Action," but the action needs to be climate action from my perspective at this point in time. And in between, we are halfway past COP28 and before COP29, so we are in that middle stage of what it is, the message now. But I think here I have a little bit of an overview of various themes, and it is a dense presentation. But if there is one thing I would like you to remember is this: we have, but you particularly, because you are at university, you're starting your conceptualization of how you want to work in life, how do you want to develop your profession. You have to have this clear sense of responsibility, a real focus on your own generation, the generations after you, the generation after the ones that will follow you, and retain life on the planet as livable, not just bearable, livable and fun. And I think this picture, I like this picture, I think it says that. And not just because we are in this transition period in which old models of development, and we know they are the wrong models. We know that big, tall skyscrapers are not necessarily the way forward. We know that plastic has some very good things, but also some terrible ones. We know that car-based societies are not right. But somehow we are not leaving them behind yet. And it's very important that we have very clear in our mind that sticking to the current development models is sticking to the wrong things. We have to be convinced, even if at the beginning of your career, you will be asked to design a big road, but you still have to be aware it's wrong. It's the wrong way forward, it's the wrong future. So I'm going to go through a few climate basics, basic principles, and probably these are things that you've heard before, but it's just to set the scene. So this graph here that refers to the Northern Hemisphere, but is the famous hockey stick graph. Hockey stick because, yeah, it resembles one of the sticks used by hockey players. And this was developed in the 1990s, early 1990s, and was publicized very much in the year 1999. And it was shocking because it was illustrating that if one looks back to the year 1000, so if we look back 1000 years, yes, there has been erratic patterns of climate now and again, but nothing like what we're seeing today. And so that was the shock then. But if you think about it, it was 25 years ago that this came up, and it was developed 30 years ago and made public and very much aware, made aware 25 years ago. Another interesting graph, I like graphs, I must confess, is this of the climate stripes. If you want to Google, show your stripes, at Hawkins is fun. You can put any countries in the world and you get this pattern of stripes. Of course, it's a much shorter period of time, about 100 years, 150 years. And each line is a blue if it is a colder year than the year before, and red if it is a warmer year than the year before. So it shows exactly the same pattern, and the same happening in Europe, in Africa, every country of the world we go and we find the same pattern. And now they're saying they have to find a darker maroon and it starts to look black because the increase year on year is more and more. So all of this means that whatever we do, there will be radical change. The UN calls it transformative and irreversible change. So that means that there is a degree of not going back. We are already on the course to some form of, I don't know, you can say disaster, or anyway, some form of irreversible change, just to use the neutral scientific language. And there are only the UN panel for climate change, International Panel for Climate Change, has developed a big range of scenarios. But out of all of the scenarios studied, there are only 2 plausible stroke optimistic scenarios, scenarios that are not total disaster, but very significant change. So the scenario A here is what is called the 1.5 degrees overshoot. This means that we will go beyond the 1.5 degrees average across the planet, increase in climate change, and that is the degree in increase in temperature, and after which biodiversity will change dramatically, the pattern of agriculture will change dramatically, the seasons will change, even the rotation of the Earth will change, just because the pattern of distribution of water on the planet will change. But because we will all finally wake up and come together and act very quickly after a series of years of disaster, then we will go back to a stable situation, a stable climate. The second scenario, the scenario B, is the one that assumes that we will be implementing everything that we are working on at the moment. So we are doing all of that each country is promising. We will do it in full, and we will still achieve a climate increase of 3 degrees, roughly, 2.5 to 3 degrees Celsius increase. That is permanent instability. So we will not return to a situation of stability different from today. We will be in permanent states of instability, but not necessarily destroying the whole planet. And I think I have a graph about that later on. So here, this other graph, again, sorry, there are 3 or 4 of these, shows why we need speed and scale. And speed and scale is very much the 2 words, speed and scale, coming across all of the international organizations working in this sector, is that if we do not mitigate, that is reducing emissions, so reducing pollution dramatically, if we do not mitigate fast enough, we will not have time to create adaptation. So, and then the residual risk will be high, and because inevitably we are going to see extreme climate events, the loss and damage, so the impact and the cost of destruction and damage to livelihoods will be more and more significant. So just if you imagine that instead of this being so steep would be nearly flat or sort of like less steep, that means that we need to do more for adaptation. If we don't do much adaptation, so if this graph, this line stays here, then the residual risk is very big, and the loss and damage as a consequence is very big. And I really like this quote from Deborah Roberts of the International Panel for Climate Change. While we waste time and while we discuss, nature will continue to send us bigger and bigger invoices, bigger and bigger costs in events with dramatic effects. So that of coming together, everyone needs to make their part. So if we if every country does not mitigate their emissions and their pollution, we will all have to adapt more. We will all have to pay for the risk and the damage that will follow. We all have to come together. And so international mutual support is not a case of good countries helping people in need. We are all in need in this situation. We all need to help each other, and we all need to try and reduce the loss and damage collectively. And so the action needs to be everywhere, and everywhere at the same time, and everyone together. And this is something that I will be repeating over and over again. In all of this, there is a big argument of climate injustice and historic responsibility. So the countries that over the past 200 years have polluted the most should pay more and should also help the others. And that is a very valid argument, and it is accepted or acknowledged, but is also contested as a legal argument. In all of the international agreements, the countries that are at the top of this sort of chart, they all absolutely reject anything that will make them legally responsible for floods in other parts of the world. And that is because everybody knows that these costs will be massive. And so that is, in a way, insisting in this historical responsibility as a legal responsibility is a wrong route, because it will never be accepted. It's too big a risk. But what it is a big pressure to enforce cooperation or to encourage cooperation and to pressurize richer countries at the top of the spectrum to do more and to lead the way very much firmly from the front. So one important thing to remember, and here I'm just talking about the UK, but it's the same everywhere, and I'm taking the UK because I know well, but also because the UK is considered to have very, very strong climate-friendly legislation and has passed a lot of legislation to recognize climate change. But these are the stripes, the climate stripes I was showing to you earlier, and here they are stretched, in a timeline. So if we look, it doesn't matter really these, but since nearly 75 years ago, the UK have enacted a town planning legislation. Environmental impact assessments have been introduced 75 years ago. Guidelines for reducing traffic are 30 years old. Climate Change Act, 20 years old. All of this has changed nothing. It's not enough. All of the stripes tell you that has not made enough of a difference. Not enough has changed, despite the fact that all of this legislation is in place. We definitely need to do more. So if I'm convincing you that these are important things to know, these two reports are not big reports, and the executive summaries are just a few pages long, and some of the graphs I've shown come from these reports. I think these reports are really very much worth reading, or at least flicking through, just to understand the international context and also why things are not quite going at the speed they need. In all of this, of course, we know now that, or at least we are aware that there are two scenarios. Both scenarios involve massive change and massive transformation. We have to imagine a new model for the future. We have to accept that we have no experience to really describe what a future without cars, without plastic, without, I don't know, all the things that we have been used to, without fossil fuels, without, I don't know, all of those things that we know without consumption as a main goal. We don't really know how it looks like, but we have to work towards it anyway. And also we have to recognize that social justice is essential. It's not essential, again, because of philanthropy and because it's the right thing to do, but it is because without it, we are not going to be able to go fast as we need to. And also we cannot have, I think here the UNFCCC, so the UN organization that looks, that focuses on climate change, says it very clearly: there will be no peace in the world if not by keeping life on the planet bearable, at least bearable for everyone. And of course, the UN Habitat, the Sustainable Development Goals, the leaving no one behind is also a very much an unescapable commitment. And every country of the world has signed up to this. So at least in theory, every country should be very much firmly behind these two notions of social justice. So now a few words on international action. So what are the nations doing? So the UN Habitat has promoted the Sustainable Development Goals. You are surely familiar with those. Shabnam mentioned the Climate Action SDG number 13. These are voluntary, but all of the countries that are part of the United Nations signed up to them. And there was a call of a decade of action started in 2020 to 2030, and now there is the future, what happens after 2030 is being focused on. And it's very clear that not enough has been done through this decade of action, or not as much as was hoped for. But still, it's a strong strategy that all countries have embraced, and most countries do annual progress reports on how they are progressing on implementation of the SDGs. And it's a very comprehensive definition of what the world should look like. On the climate action only, the UNFCCC, that is the climate change organization dealing with of the UN, there is a legally binding document that is the Paris Agreement of COP21 of 2015, that is the commitment to keep temperature as close as possible to 1.5 degrees for the reasons I said before, because everybody acknowledged that a lot of instability and dramatic changes in nature will happen after this temperature. This is a legally binding international agreement, but the way this is implemented is through pledges, through voluntary nationally determined contributions. So again, that is because the UN can deal with international agreements if they put the planet at risk, or there is an international risk, which the climate is recognized now as one of them. But it cannot interfere in domestic policy. So it can say this is the amount of emissions that the UK needs to reduce, but it cannot say how the UK should do it. It is up to the UK to demonstrate that they are doing it and report on that. So basically there is also a sense, and all of this is through consensus and collaboration. So every country in the UN have the same right of vote. It's different from the other assemblies, but in this case, for example, a little island like Tuvalu has the same voting rights as the United States. So whatever they block, Tuvalu blocks, is blocked. So everybody has a veto power. So it's very difficult, and progress is not very fast because of that. But it is very important to understand that every country counts the same in this context. The big difference in between the SDGs and the UNFCCC sort of targets, the Paris Agreement, is they're both voluntary, but the big difference is that the SDGs are based on progressive improvement. So you have to report that you're doing better and better and better year on year. And basically you're shamed if you're not doing better, but it's just progressive improvement. Instead, the UNFCCC is based on target. We have to achieve the 1.5 degrees Celsius. So we have to be in this band, in this curve. And that is the target. And the national determined contributions, the national pledges, need to demonstrate that they are bending the curve enough to get to that target. So it's target-based, and it's fairly narrowly focused on reducing pollution, reducing emissions. And here what you see is that we are really not on track at all. This is the current track. This is where we are now, so very far away from where we should be. With all of the scenario B that I was showing is with all the implementation of all of the pledges, which is roughly this. But in case of, for example, good technology or big impact of technology, big discoveries, for example, carbon capture on a really massive scale, maybe sometimes around 2040, there will be a flexion, but maybe it will not be that steep. So basically now really the 1.5 overshoot scenario, the scenario A, is what it is described here, is acting now and trying now to really go down to 1.5 and really realize that goal. So that is the main difference between the two. And here I want to be a little bit critical. This is the Venn diagram that I've been shown at school. I'm sure you've seen it as well. You know, that definition of sustainability, you know, environmental, social, and economic. This was invented in the 1980s. And it is now completely discredited. It's not anymore considered good enough. Just because it puts the climate on the same page or gives it the same weight as it gives economic development, and argues that the balance between the two needs to be found so that there is a compromise to be had, and it is legitimate to destroy the environment if there is an economic gain. This is no longer accepted. At least I must say, the most recent UK legislation on planning still refers to this as 3 parts to be in balance. So they still refers to this as the sustainability sort of dogma. But in the climate change sort of science and activist groups, this is completely discredited. And this is what people should really think through more, that there is an ecological ceiling, so there is a bearing capacity of the planet that we should not exceed. We should not destroy the planet for the sake of economic development. But also we have a social foundation, so we have the leaving no one behind as the baseline, and there is a donut that is the space for humanity, so where we don't destroy the planet, but we are achieving enough for everyone. And this is the space that we should try and inhabit. And of course, if there is technological improvement, then the donut will become fatter because the ecological ceiling will be pushed out a little bit more. But still, that concept that the outer ring, we have to stay within the capacity of the planet. And it is absolutely ridiculous to think that we will all go on Mars and adapt to life on Mars because we are not able, and we are able to invest in that scale of change, and we are not able to do it on this planet. That is already green, is already beautiful, it has mountains and rivers and seas, and is a wonderful planet, and we are on course to destroy it. So here again, I have some references, and there is a TED Talk link to Kate Raworth on the donut economy, which is 15 minutes, and I think is very well worth exploring. The next concept, which I find fascinating, and I've been completely captivated since my daughter invited me to read this book, The Braiding Sweetgrass, which I also invite you to read, is going back to changing completely worldview and embracing what indigenous cultures are suggesting. That is, the turtle is the American Native Nations, First Nations concept of Turtle Island, which is the partnership between humans and other beings, and also physical beings, not just other animals, but also water and mountains, etc. So non-human creatures and non-animal creatures, and the partnership of everyone to live on the planet. So all of this is based on this concept of very long-term looking, the 7 generations behind and 7 generations ahead. But also reciprocity and balance. So whatever we take, we have to give back. Whatever we affect, we have to find a new point of balance. And that is really the outer ring of the donuts that we were seeing before. And also part of this is really recognizing that nature, or Mother Nature, as is in law in some countries, has a personhood in law. So if there is this respect, then we are not here to exploit nature. Nature can sue us for damage that we do. And so it's not just the state against the company, it's nature against the company. And this has been trialed out, is in law in various countries, and it's been trialed out in Canada and in some areas of the US, but particularly in the nature reserves. So now, ending that sort of like overview of the climate sort of discourse and the climate conversations that are going on, now some pointers for us as professionals in the built environment, architects, engineers, planners, whatever we do or whatever we will end up doing in the future. So here I'm staying very generic, and I'm showing only one project that is a planning one, but just sort of a recipe if you want. So you can take and whatever you think is important, but I think all of this is very important. So whatever you're going to be doing, you're going to be designing a little park, you're going to be designing a house, whatever, you have to move away from isolated projects. You have to think that whatever you do is impacting the environment, is impacting the rest of the world. And you have a responsibility with every single action to really contribute to this agenda of reestablishing reciprocity and reestablishing the balance, living within that donut. And so really not looking at projects in isolation, and not even looking at pilot projects, just doing one exceptional development and then 25 rubbish ones or damaging ones. That's not really good. We have really to do everything thinking strategically and systemic, thinking that everything that we do involves infrastructure, involves the way we live, the way we work, and we have to find this new way of working and living that is much lighter on the planet. So, and also encourage, of course, our political leaders to stick to the promises they make and really think big and trying to have this strategic, systemic outlook towards the future. So both as sort of voters, if we are, or as project leaders, we have to think in a bigger way and in a more responsible way. Also, nature so far is the one technology we can rely on. Plants and trees and soil and water are the ones that can reestablish, are proven to reestablish the balance to of mitigation in the planet. So we have to encourage nature and not just, I don't know, the occasional green roof. Really needs to be on a massive scale. Every roof needs to be green. Every piece of land that is not needed to be paved for whatever reason needs to be green. We have to question everything and try to give nature more chance to regenerate and recover and stop the wasteful use of land that we have been doing. The third theme is that of the structure, change in infrastructure. And here particularly, I'm talking about transport. In the past 200 years, we have really focused everything on cars. Cars and parking spaces, they are the biggest land use, land take in any city. And we have to undo that. We have in your generation, in the next period of my career, that is the focus of trying to repurpose all of this infrastructure that should disappear. The work living by giving so much space to cars and car-based development is simply wrong, and it simply has led us to the situation in which we are. And with all of that, we also need to change also the way the city is structured, because of course, if we are no longer traveling by car all the time, we need to have a lot more things closer to us, from work to services and things like that. We have to change, therefore, the settlement structure. The concept of the 15-minute city, for sure you've heard of it, or transport-oriented development is really key, but it needs to be made, again, on a massive scale, not occasional little bit. Big rearranging of and reconceptualizing of cities. In Europe, for example, in many countries, in many of the big cities in Europe, there has been a tendency to say we should consolidate. We no longer need all these small-scale services. It's better to have one big hospital that has everything rather than local hospitals, for example, or one big area of industrial development rather than localized employment uses. This needs to change, because if we have to be more compact, and we might be in a situation in which there are floods. It's too hot to go around. It's too hot to travel half an hour by car to the hospital. We have to have something closer, and we have to restructure the city and think of cities in a very different way, reimagine them in a very different ways. And of course, trying to give each house the space to be there if it's hot, if it's cold, if it's, re-entirely think the way we live, considering that climate shocks will be the norm for the next decades, at least. I've been talking about the need for a just transition and making sort of socially aware. And then, of course, that is also needed if we want rapid change. If there is no consensus, if we will have wars, we will have people that will put obstacles into the change. So that of creating awareness that big change is coming, big risks are coming, and be prepared. This is really a collective effort. But also, we have to be very conscious that the metrics used for funding, for example, both international funding and banks funding or getting funding for business or whatever, are based on return of investment, cost, benefit, parameters that are potentially no longer valid, or they need a radical change in the future. Because it's not just the balance between the cost and economic benefits, which is the normal way of assessing, for example, if a project is worth doing or not. It is really the impact that it will have in making things easier in the case of climate change and the shocks. And also, everybody needs to be aware of what's going on, and that we are in a difficult period of transition, because otherwise, if there is no support, there is no way of having a collective agreement in making a change. And so that of communicating, if you're a natural communicator, if you like storytelling, if you are this should be your vocation. That of making sure that people can start to imagine it, that they will live very differently in the future, is very, very important. And therefore, this is a key area of investment, that of communicating and making people participate in common goals. So here, the one project that I will invite you to explore, maybe it's a city, the city of Helsinki, that has promised to be carbon neutral by 2030, so very, very short period of time, then carbon zero by 2040, so not just offsetting outside its own boundaries. So here is relying up to 20% by planting and having nature initiatives outside of the city boundaries, but by 2040 being carbon zero within the boundaries, and then carbon negative, so basically taking away emissions, reducing the emissions more by 2050. What it is really interesting of what they did is that they had a series of collective explorations. So basically asking the citizens what changes they think are needed, and changes at the urban structure level, the changes for neighborhoods and businesses and buildings, and changes at the individual level. So they ask people, what do you think needs to be done? And they collected that and created a strategy out of it. And it's very clear that by doing that process, everybody starts to change the way they operate, and they start to think in that strategic, systemic change that is needed. So I found this process really fascinating, and I invite you, here is the link. Your professors have it, so they can give it to you. And now I just want to conclude, last few slides, very technical, and I'm really sorry about this, but talking about money and finance, and why things need to be changed there, and why finance is important to think finance in a different way. So first of all, this is a red flag. Whenever you do development, whether it is a building, infrastructure, engineering piece, or planning, you are locating resources. And by doing that, you inevitably create winners and losers. So just think, you decide to put a bus stop at one corner or another corner, you put a shop in front of the bus stop and gives it an advantage, or away from the bus stop and you create a loser, or where you locate the stops of a metro, or where you create a new destination, that is inevitable. And therefore, is inevitable also that there is a lot of lobbying and a lot of pressure. There is a lot of investors that are still working with the wrong development approaches, that want the metro in front of their building, the metro stop in front of their building. And you will be in that situation in which you have pressures to create winners, because the winners are the ones that have the money to lobby and to pressurize. And so that is a problem. And also here, this picture comes from a film, Italian film, called Le mani sulla città, the hands on the city. In English, it's been translated as hands of corruption. That is basically, development has always been a way to create wealth. A country has land, and if the land doesn't have resources, so for example, diamond mines, that of building buildings and giving permission to build buildings is the first way to create some money and some funding, which is of course necessary, and every country has done it. From Italy, of course, the film of the 1960s, but also Dubai. That's how it created all the wealth, by building shopping malls and hotels and then apartments. And then housing projects on a massive scale in China is the only way to get funding for the municipalities. So this is inherent into the system that we have. And you will find yourself that you have to deal with this. But you have to achieve the rest as well. You have to achieve that big change and have that responsibility to work towards a better future in all cases. And also, so that is the first bad news. The second bad news is that even with the most generosity of international countries, even if the US and Arab states all put towards climate change, a lot of funding, the need will always be more. It will never be enough. So the only way is to really put together finance sources from everywhere and trying to be innovative in thinking about money and funding. There is no country in the world that will not have to set aside part of their budgets for climate change. That is inevitable. And therefore, that means that other things will have to suffer. You know, but it needs to be considered an investment to reduce future disaster costs. So we know, we said that nature will send us more and more invoices for additional costs. So we have to prevent those invoices by investing now. And so as a country, we will have to do, every country will have to set aside some money for that. Other things that the public sector can do, and maybe you will find yourself in that position, is really to facilitate climate responses. So, for example, by facilitating the creation of a bus network that is completely electric, like the one here in Milan, that they didn't stay, you know, is in the historic center. Maybe the charging you see here in this picture, the charging element, some people in the city were saying was inappropriate, is more important than anything else at this stage. So even if it is in a historic center, having electric buses and electric charging is essential. Replacing subsidies for roads, for example, is another one that is an important thing that doesn't imply spending more out of the taxes of a country, but is removing spending in the wrong things and focusing the spending on the right things. And hopefully you will find yourself in a situation in which you can influence some of these decisions. And also support, you know, using fines to reduce car use, to encourage recycling, reduce the use of plastic, and so on. So all of that is things that the public sector can do. And also the public sector can create viable private sector investment through PPPs or things like that. So, for example, India aggregated the purchase of electric vehicles. So electric buses are very expensive, but if all of the cities in India adopt the same bus and makes a single purchase, then there is a hefty discount. And so things like these are things that needs to be thought through. And then carbon pricing is a very complicated thing. So I'm not going to be boring with you with all of this, but the idea that who emits pollution then needs to pay more is obviously accepted in principle. In practice is very, very difficult, and in practice is not happening. This idea of the polluter pays so little that is worth polluting anyway at this stage. And that is for a general, you know, a set of reasons, and 3 of them are here. But if you're interested, again, here there is a World Bank report on this if you want to know more. And then, of course, there are profitable climate solutions, and there are private investments where private investors can do, with a little bit of help, a little bit of encouragement, should do without financial incentives, maybe just through facilitation rather than financial contribution. So the production of batteries, the production of solar and electricity, electric vehicles, and all of that. All of that needs the role of the private sector has a big role in there. And of course, people, individuals, can also change their lifestyles, change what they purchase, be conscious that everything we do needs to be climate aware from yesterday. And this is really, really key. And so this is it. This is my own sort of like overview. And so here are the things that are happening. Action in cities is becoming more and more important now, you know, beyond closing the coal mines and the coal power stations and acting on oil and gas. that action in cities is really the next big thing. So all your career, my career, all of our work will be focusing on that in the next decades. Social justice, finance, being sort of changing the finance sector, fossil fuels disappearing and plastic as well, and how that will change our lives. And then all of us becoming used to have shocks, to have floods, to have wildfires, and becoming resilient, knowing what we do in those cases. And so I think this is all it. And this is my last sort of message. Nobody can do it on their own. Everybody's needed, and you are very much needed in this effort. And so if you have any questions now, I'm open to that, and I'll stop sharing.
Thank you very much, dear Martina. Thank you. I think that was very clear and to the point. I'm sure our young generation will take all these from here. And this is what we are trying to do at the university, that, you know, being future professionals, but being good citizens at the same time is very important, you know, carrying the word to the community, to their families, to their friends, you know, spreading the word around about what's happening and what we should be doing is the most important thing. I don't know if any of the students have got any questions. You can just write them down, or I can unmute you. While waiting, I have a question.
Yeah.
What will be, I mean, considering all these issues, what do you think will be the future of the professions like planning, architecture, and related disciplines, and how we should be educating our students, for not only at the universities but at all levels, because I think the future is in their hands somehow.
Yeah. I think it's very exciting times for the profession, because it's a time of change, and we don't exactly know where we are going, but we know that we have to leave what we know behind. And therefore, in a way, the danger for people like you and me is that we will be surpassed very quickly unless we are the ones that are also part of the change. But the risk that we are part of the problem, like we have been part of the problems by not doing enough during our lives, is very real. And so in a way, all of the people here, all of the young people here, they have a huge role to reconceive and look and not take anything for granted. I think being very critical and very aware that we need a different world. And therefore, I don't know, you know, I think read a lot, be aware a lot, have a 20% of yourself at least as an activist, as a person committed to change, and don't think of work as this work and the work of the next few years, of few decades, as only a way to, you know, make a living. It's a way to save the world. Mm-hmm. And so it's very important. It is essential. So it's very exciting, but will also mean learning new techniques, questioning, having the courage somehow to be maybe in a big international office and saying, this analysis is not the right one. You have not considered this. Things are changing rapidly, but still we are in this transition phase. In which wrong things are made, big skyscrapers are being built when they cannot be made sustainable, they cannot be made appropriate. they're energy intensive, and so we have to be aware and questioning.
Are there any questions? I have already unmuted you, so if anyone wants to ask a question. It seems not.
So maybe I will ask a question to the people to the people here.
Nice.
You know, is you come from different countries as well, and from different places. What are your models? What are your, you know, the things that you would like to achieve, and what it is that you think, oh, this is a good thing that I've seen, I've read, and you would like to, you know, to be guided by that,
rather than the star architects.
rather than the or maybe the star architects, you know, you
or some
prepared to be critical and to think that maybe you're better than them.
Anyone wants to answer?
And then there is a question in the chat.
Oh, okay. I didn't see that.
So there are two questions in there. One is the UNFCCC is target-based, and what is the implication? So at the moment, most places, you know, Helsinki, that's why I mentioned Helsinki, because Helsinki has a target and also a way of trying to achieve it. It will be seen to, it will be sort of, you know, we'll have to wait a few years to see whether they're on course or not. A lot of English cities have declared a climate emergency, and they have declared that they will want to be net zero by a certain, I don't know, 2040 or 2030. Dubai or Abu Dhabi said they want to be net zero by 2050. But they do that by investing in carbon capture and planting trees elsewhere, and not necessarily changing the way the city is structured. And so is mainly by saying, well, it's a little bit like saying I'm overweight, and then I do surgery and I reduce the fat, and then I will be overweight again. Rather than saying I should have a different diet.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think most cities, Helsinki, they have a plan if they implement it. Another island in Denmark, they decided that would attract tourism, and it would be if they declare themselves that they wanted to be zero carbon by 2030, and they have discovered that they can't make it, is that they can reduce dramatically their energy consumption, move entirely or nearly entirely to renewable energy, but still they cannot live without plastic as a small island. You cannot be the only one that bans plastic in the country. So, for example, so these are things that need to be worked through. So for urban planning practices, I think imagining how it is to live in a zero carbon lifestyle is difficult. It's difficult, but it's what we need to start working towards. It will inevitably be progressive for a while rather than target-based, I think.
And if I may add to that, of course, there's a difference between developed countries and developing countries, you know. Also low-income citizens and middle or high-income citizens. So there is always this kind of injustice. So trying to reach just environments and just cities should also be a task. And it's not easy. It's not easy. There's a lot of imbalance and injustice all over the world. Even in richer countries, there's injustice. And comparing different countries, comparing different neighborhoods. In one city, there are different neighborhoods, different type of people. So all these tasks, all these goodwills, let's say, are good. They have to be there. But really they have to be, we have to change however we are living. That's probably the main issue, and there is a lot of responsibility for individual citizens as well as design and planning and architecture related disciplines, and not only all these, for all. It's like leaving no one behind, but working all together, kind of thing.
Absolutely, and also, but also maybe the same thing should different places should do different things, because say the estimation is that an American child born now will produce the equivalent emissions of 20 children from Uganda. So even the Uganda of today. So in Uganda, the effort should be in preparing for the climate emergencies that are inevitable, that are happening everywhere, but maybe Uganda is less prepared than the United States. And the United States and the UK and Europe by and large need to really reduce our emission and our dependency on oil, plastic, coal consumption, which is the whole basis is a difficult one to do, because it's the whole basis of the economy and impacts everyone, in the sense that if there is no consumption, there are no taxes, and if there are no taxes, there is no education, and if there is no and also there is no care for elderly people, and so even that change will be catastrophic. And some countries will say, well, I have no sympathy, right, for you, because you have been living as a rich and life of consumption, and now you have to imagine that you don't need that. Actually, you need quite the opposite. But still socially and politically is difficult to do. And so, but having said that, organizations like C40, for example, and is something that I didn't mention, but it's worth mentioning, pairs cities from rich cities with poorer cities, and try to, through the collaboration, to make sure that both cities gain from a program of improvements. So again, it's not every city should be every city of the world. It's partial, but is a way to understand and try to imagine a different life for the future.
Yep. There's no answer to your question either, so everyone is so quiet. Okay. Well,
so I would really then encourage you to really think, look, search the internet, look through social media, create yourself a bank of concepts and projects that you think, oh, this is, what if the world was all like this?
Yeah.
And because you will need that armor to face big changes ahead.
Exactly. The future is in young generations' hands and minds and hearts.
Yeah,
I think, and also as the future professionals in our fields, let's say. Okay, well, probably then that will be the end. I would like to thank you very much. I think it was all very clear and very useful. So I will share it with the other students who were not able to join us, and hope to see you in some other events in the future.
Thank you very
Thank
much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So that will be the end of the event.
Thank
Have
you
a
so
good day.
much.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.